Let's open up a fascinating case file today. We're diving into a historical puzzle that's been hiding in plain sight for centuries. It all comes down to a single speech in the New Testament that seems to get some really crucial facts wrong about a famous Old Testament landmark. So how could a mistake like that even happen? And what does it tell us? Let's dig in. This is a question that historians and detectives ask all the time. What do you do when an account just doesn't quite line up with its own sources? Well, today we're putting on our detective hats to try and solve a nearly 2,000-year-old mystery. So our whole case revolves around one single really powerful speech. It's given by a man named Stephen, and it's recorded in the book of Acts. Now, this isn't just any speech. He is literally on trial for his life, and he's giving this final defense where he summarizes the entire history of his people. But hidden inside the details of that speech, that's where we find the clues to our mystery.
Okay, this single passage gives us our two main clues. First, it says 75 people went down to Egypt. And second, it says the family tomb was in a place called Shechem and that it was bought by Abraham himself. Lock those two details away because they are the absolute heart of this case.
Let's start with our first piece of evidence, the head count. Stephen's speech in Acts is supposed to be recounting events from the book of Genesis, right? It's the original source material. So the obvious first step for any investigator is to go back to that original source and ask, do the numbers actually match up? The account in Acts is crystal clear, 75 people. It's a specific, unambiguous number. There's really no wiggle room for interpretation on that one. But the moment we check that against the original account in Genesis, we hit our first major snag. Genesis says, very clearly, that 70 members of the household went to Egypt. And right there, we have our first clear contradiction. So there you have it, our first puzzle. The speech in Acts says 75. The original source text in Genesis says 70. It's a clear numerical mismatch. But trust me, this is just the warm-up. Now, look, a mix-up with numbers, that's one thing. But our second clue is where this mystery really, really deepens. This one isn't about a number. It's about a place, and it's an incredibly important place, the final resting place of the patriarchs. Okay, so Stephen's speech makes a very specific claim. The patriarchs were buried in Shechem in a tomb that Abraham himself bought. The details are all there, the location is Shechem, the buyer is Abraham, but does the original account from Genesis actually agree with this? And when we go back to Genesis, the story completely changes. The tomb that Abraham bought was the famous cave of Machpelah, and it was located in Hebron, not Shechem. That's a totally different city. The conflict here couldn't be more obvious. Acts says the tomb is in Shechem. Genesis says the tomb Abraham bought is in Hebron. This isn't just a number. This is a major geographical contradiction about a sacred site. So what on earth is going on here? How do we explain this? Well, our source material proposes a really fascinating theory. This isn't just a simple mistake. It's a case of conflation. Basically, two different but similar stories got accidentally merged into one. Okay, so if Abraham's famous tomb was in Hebron, why would the speaker mention Shechem at all? Was it just a random error, a slip of the tongue? Well, it turns out Shechem is a super important place in the story of the patriarchs, but for a completely different reason. And there it is, the missing piece of the puzzle, right out of the book of Joshua. It turns out there was a very important burial in Shechem. It was the burial of Joseph, in a piece of land that was bought not by his great-grandfather Abraham, but by his own father Jacob. So here's how the theory breaks down. You've got two completely separate burial traditions. First, you have the main family tomb of the patriarchs, which is in Hebron and was bought by Abraham. Second, you have Joseph's specific burial plot, which is in Shechem and was bought by Jacob. The theory is that Stephen's speech accidentally mashes them together. It takes the people from the first story, the patriarchs, and puts them in a location from the second story. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, so it's a historical mix-up. It happens. But here's the kicker. The source we're looking at makes one final, really powerful point. It argues that for the actual people listening to this speech back in the 1st century, this particular mistake would have been, well, glaringly obvious. And here's why that mistake would have been so impossible to miss. The tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron wasn't some obscure, forgotten ruin. It was a massive national landmark. For the original audience, confusing it with a site in Shechem would be like a modern American confusing the Lincoln Memorial with the Statue of Liberty. It just wouldn't happen. The proof is literally set in stone, and it's right here on the timeline. Decades before Stephen even gave his speech, King Herod the Great, the guy famous for his huge building projects, built this enormous, impressive monument right over the tomb in Hebron. This thing was a famous pilgrimage site and had already been standing for over 35 years. You just couldn't miss it.
And that brings us to the final conclusion from our source. Because the tomb in Hebron was such a famous, well-known landmark, its location was basically common knowledge. So the argument goes, no first-hand witness from that time and place would have made such an obvious geographical mistake. This suggests that the speech we read in Acts might not be a literal word-for-word transcript of what Stephen said, but maybe a later summary that accidentally included a historical inaccuracy. And this leaves us with one final thought to chew on. This entire investigation, this whole case file, it all hinged on just a couple of small details in an ancient text. It's a powerful reminder that if you look closely, even the tiniest inconsistencies can completely reshape how we understand a historical story. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other clues are out there, hiding in plain sight, just waiting for someone to notice?